If you guys don't know, I was banned from speaking at King's College. We've talked about it a few times during the conference. Apparently I am too dangerous for you guys to hear me speak, or maybe too controversial. I don't think that I'm very dangerous. Controversial maybe, but I'll let you guys decide. But in all seriousness, as Angel said, these conversations about war can be very difficult and very emotional. I know that yesterday I got emotional when hearing Tanya speak about Ukraine. And that is because, as US Civil War General W.T. Sherman famously quoted, "War is hell." And in a way, I think I've always known this. I've learned history when I was growing up, and I learned about the tragedy of war, but I didn't really fully understand this until October 7th of 2023. I woke up on October 7th, I live in the US, and I saw a notification that Israel had been attacked by Gaza. And this is something that has happened before. And in the past, Israel has always kind of taken care of it. They have the IDF and the Iron Dome. It was something I wasn't necessarily worried about until I went on social media. I spend a lot of time on Twitter and social media, and when I logged on to my accounts, my feed was just flooded with the most graphic images that I have ever seen of the most horrible things happening to people being just massacred, images of women who had very obviously been sexually assaulted, videos of people screaming for their lives as they were being dragged over the border into Gaza. And I just couldn't even imagine what kind of evil could do something like this. But I came out soon after, very much in support of Israel. And Israel declared war on Gaza, and Israel eventually counterattacked against Hamas. And when this happened, my feed was again flooded with extremely graphic images. Images of a lot of children who were being hurt or killed. Gaza is a very young country. About 50%, I believe, of their population is under the age of 18. And so while Israel was targeting Hamas and fighting back, a lot of children were dying. And this was really hard for me and a lot of people to see. I remember getting a call from my mom. And my mom is not very invested in, say, international politics, but she does watch the news. And she called me and she said, you know, Kiyah, I saw what happened on October 7th. I 100% believe that Hamas is evil. What they did should not go without Israel defending themselves. But she said, I don't know if I can support what Israel is doing. Because I am seeing these images, I am seeing children getting hurt, I am seeing people in Gaza, people who were not active on October 7th, who were not killing people, I'm seeing them die. I'm seeing people who did not support Hamas, they are dying. I am seeing kids, they are dying. There are hostages that were taken into Gaza and their lives are at risk, and it doesn't seem like Israel cares about them because they are bombing and they are attacking and people are dying. Now, a lot of people on social media have kind of repeated the sentiment that my mom had, these ideas that Israel is in the wrong or that they are doing something wrong. That they're doing something wrong because of how they're responding and the fact that people are dying. There are kind of two types of people who give me problems on social media. One group are the pro-Hamas people who believe that everything that Hamas has done is justified, October 7th was justified. And I'm not even going to address those people. I think that they're wrong. I think that they are supporting evil. But there's also a group of people who believe that Hamas was wrong. They believe that Hamas should be punished or that Hamas should be destroyed. But they are angry, again, that innocent people or civilians are being killed in this war. And what they'll come into my comments is they'll say, Kiyah, you say that you are an individualist, and I say that I'm an individualist. It's in my bio on my social media platforms. So if you say you're an individualist, how is it that you can support the fact that innocent people are dying, the fact that citizens are dying, people who are not Hamas are dying? How can you support Israel knowing these facts? And this is what I'm going to talk about today. Let me start by saying my views. I do not support people dying. That's a very broad statement that I want people to die. I don't want people to die. I hate war. War is awful. It is terrible. It should never happen. I do support Israel's right to self-defense. And I believe that every death in this conflict, whether it is on the side of Israel's citizens or citizens of Gaza, is the responsibility for those deaths and the guilt for those deaths lies solely on Hamas and their supporters. And I'm going to talk about why in a second. But before I get into it, I want to clarify that I am not an expert on history, on international policy, or on war strategy. So those are not things that I'm going to really touch on in this talk. What I want to talk about is the moral fundamentals of who is responsible in war. And I'm going to talk about, yes, the Israel conflict against Gaza, but I also am going to talk a little bit about Ukraine and Russia, and a few more examples from history, because I think that these fundamental ideas of innocence and guilt and morality can be thought about in every war, any conflict between states. So let's start with a very basic question. What is war? Why do we go to war? What is the goal of war? Well, a war is very obviously an armed conflict, and it is an armed conflict between states. Well, let's take a step back. What is a conflict? Let's say that I am walking down the street and somebody attacks me. They come up and they are trying to hurt me. In that situation, I have two options. One, I can let them attack me, I can do nothing, or I can do what I can to defend myself. Now, I'm not very strong, but with all the force that I have, I would defend my life in that situation because I value my life. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to die. I would defend my life to the best of my ability and in hopes that this person will stop attacking me. Well, let's say this person doesn't stop attacking me. Let's say that I am able to temporarily get them to move back, but they try to attack again. I'm going to have to continue fighting just to protect myself. I can't push them back once and hope that they will stop. I cannot tell them to stop and hope that they will stop. I'm going to have to do everything I can to defend myself and maybe hope that the police will show up and take them away. War can be seen as very similar. There are countries that will be aggressive, that will initiate force against another country. And in that situation, the government of the country, or the country that is the victim, the country that is being attacked, has two options. One, they can allow themselves to be attacked, they can allow themselves to be harmed, or they can defend themselves. And they can use force to defend themselves, as much as they need to make sure that their citizens are safe. But there's one difference two differences between a war and an individual fight, right? A war is between governments, an individual fight is between individuals. But there also are no police. There is no international police that's going to show up and take away the people who are responsible for the attack on this country. As much as people like to talk about international law, there is no international government that will come in and take care of these things. So the only option is to fight and to defend their lives until the enemy is unable and unwilling to continue fighting. That is how this government and this state that is being attacked can guarantee the safety of their citizens, guarantee that they can protect their lives. And let me not even say that this is what they can do. This is what the defending government should do. Their responsibility is to fight back. Their responsibility is to defend their citizens. Because this is the purpose of government. The purpose of government is to write and enforce laws within a geographic area and to use force to enforce those laws. Now, the moral purpose of government is that these laws and this force should be used to protect rights, the life, liberty, and property of the citizens of that country. A rights-respecting government, because they use force only to protect rights, they will never initiate it. They will not use it to violate rights. They will not use it to just harm people. But they will defend the rights of their citizens. That is their job. And this means doing whatever it takes to end the threats to their citizens' lives and well-being. Because the alternative is that they allow this aggressive government, this government that is initiating force, to kill or enslave or take hostage or force their citizens to live under an oppressive regime or whatever these consequences may be. They have a choice: protect their citizens' rights or not to. Because these governments are not the government of the entire world, there is no global government. Their responsibility is to protect the rights of their citizens. If they have to choose between protecting their citizens, and that might mean having to take the life of somebody in another country, or preserve the lives of people in the other country, but sacrifice their citizens, they have to choose to protect their citizens' lives. That is their job, that is their moral responsibility, to protect their citizens at all costs. Now, if all governments did their jobs, only used force to protect the rights of their citizens, there would be no wars. No government would initiate force, no government would be aggressive towards another state, and therefore no government would be put in the position to have to defend themselves. But unfortunately, this isn't true. There are immoral governments. And not only governments that attack other countries, but governments that oppress their own citizens. And we can look at these conflicts today as an example. Hamas in Gaza is a theocratic dictatorship. They oppress their citizens. They have not had an election since 2005. Anyone who comes out against them is at risk of being put in jail or killed. Right? Russia is also a dictatorship. Yes, they have elections, but these elections are full of fraud. And there is no freedom of speech in Russia also. The media is highly restricted. People who come out against Putin are, again, at risk of being jailed or killed. These governments, these immoral governments that don't respect rights, that choose to oppress their own people and sometimes choose to attack other countries, as Hamas did on October 7th, as Putin did when he invaded Russia, these are the first people that are guilty. They directly are guilty for the deaths of the people that they are attacking, the deaths of the citizens in the country they have attacked, and for the deaths of their own citizens. Because they have brought their citizens into a conflict that they would not be in if it wasn't for these governments that have decided to attack. They are the cause of the war. And it is their inability to do their jobs, their decision not to respect rights, that has led to this conflict happening in the first place. Now, why is it that some governments protect rights and some don't? Because unlike Gaza and Russia, there are countries like Israel and Ukraine. And while they are not perfectly free countries, perfectly rights-respecting countries, they are significantly better at respecting their citizens' rights, right? Israel is a parliamentary republic that uses a democratic process to elect officials. They were built on the premise of free speech and protecting the rights of all of their citizens, no matter their race or religion. Ukraine also protects their citizens' freedom of speech. They are allowed to criticize the government. They have elections that are considered free and fair. So why is it that sometimes countries have dictators and sometimes countries have relatively free governments? Government is directly reflective of the culture of the citizens that live in that country. Politics is downstream from culture. And when I talk about culture, a lot of people will tell me that they think this is a collectivist idea. Because you're talking about a group of people. You're talking about ideas of a nation. But culture is not collectivist. Culture is made up of individuals, individual ideas. It is people, individuals who decide to believe certain beliefs, to pursue certain values, to hold certain ideas. And downstream from that, it is individuals who decide to act on these beliefs, who decide to elect certain people into power or support certain policies. It is individuals who decide to run for office, individuals who decide what platforms they want to run on. And it is individuals who decide to attack other countries, individuals who decide to defend themselves. So if everyone is an individual and everyone has their own ideas and thoughts and beliefs, why is it that we call this war, say, a war between Israel and Gaza, and not a war against Hamas? A lot of people have said things like this, like, it is not the responsibility of the Gazans that this war is happening, or it is not the responsibility of citizens of Russia that Putin has decided to invade Ukraine. And I think that this is an insane idea, that citizens of a country are not responsible for their governments. Because that is to say that politics doesn't matter, that who you vote for doesn't matter, that what policies you support doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter who's in charge. Governments and their people exist in two completely different dimensions that have no... What's happening? Okay. That governments and their citizens exist in these two completely different dimensions, and there is no overlap between how they interact with each other. And that's not true. We can look at a lot of dictatorships, even some of them today, and see that many of them were elected into power. Hitler was elected into power. Hamas was elected into power. Even though Putin was originally appointed the president of Russia, he was later re-elected into power. And yes, Hamas has not had an election in a long time, and Putin and Russia's elections are full of fraud. But even independent polls have shown that they have a significant amount of support from their citizens. And even if we don't use polls, we can also see that because these leaders have been allowed to remain in power, they have been allowed to continue to do what they are doing, to oppress their citizens and to terrorize other countries, that their ideas are, if not entirely supported by their people, they are at least tolerated. And that is a sign of the culture of these countries, that these cultures allow evil to fester. Now, in these countries, there tends to be three different groups of people. First are direct supporters of these regimes, people who voted them into power, people who help them execute their plans, people who, even if they aren't wearing a military uniform or working in government, as Russia is attacking Ukraine or as Hamas is attacking Israel, they are providing these militaries with food. They are making their weapons. They are actively supporting the war machine, even if they never put on a uniform. And these supporters are responsible for the continuation of the war, for the continuation of the existences of these regimes, and for the deaths that come out of these wars. Because without these people, these supporters, the regimes would not be able to continue doing what they're doing. It's kind of a team effort. They cannot survive without their supporters. And their supporters are just as guilty as they are. Now, there's a second group of people who live in these countries, people who may not be interested in politics. They may say, I didn't vote, or maybe they voted for somebody else and their person didn't win. But now they are kind of maybe they're out living their lives, not really worried about what's happening. Are these people guilty? Here's what they're guilty of. These types of people are guilty of evasion. They are guilty of not caring about the horrors that their government is doing, whether it is to themselves and to their own citizens, or again, to the other countries that they are terrorizing. If these people who are pretending that their government has no effect on their lives, if they were to, do something about it, these governments might not be in power. We know what happens when governments lose the support, not even in the active and the passive support of their citizens. Revolutions happen, coups happen. These dictators are thrown out of power by force, by vote, in some way or another. And so these people who are not doing anything, who are pretending like their government is fine, tolerating this evil, and not caring about their lives enough to do anything, not caring about their well-being enough to want to stop the oppression, they are also guilty of allowing the war machine to continue, of allowing the government to continue doing what it's doing. Now, there's a third group of people. There are people who live in these countries who are actively fighting against their governments. They're aggressive, non-rights respecting governments. One example of this is the son of Hamas, Mossab Hassan Youssef, who was born in the West Bank, grew up in the West Bank, was indoctrinated into the ideas of Hamas, that he should kill Jews and destroy Israel in the name of Islam. He grew up and realized that he did not want to be like Hamas. He did not want to be like his father. He did not want to be a part of the problem. And so he defected. He actually became a spy for Israel and helped them to stop terrorist attacks coming out of the West Bank. He helped them in an attempt to take Hamas out of power. Now, Hamas does not have as much power in the West Bank as they do in Gaza, but they do still oppress their citizens and terrorize Israelis in the same way that they do from Gaza. Risking his life, but doing so because he had the moral clarity to understand good and evil, and knowing that his family that still lives in the West Bank is better off with Hamas not being in power. There are people like Alex Navalny, who was recently died, who was a political opponent to Putin. He was very vocally and actively against Putin for the last few years. He has been trying to bring Russia to a more liberal democratic place. And in doing so, his life has been in danger. He was poisoned at one point. His house was raided by the police, and he ended up being put in a workers' colony in Russia where he died. Now, fighting against the government doesn't mean that you have to become a spy or a politician. Even we can look back to, say, Nazi Germany and see people who were hiding Jews in their houses because they were actively fighting against or going against the beliefs and the actions of their government. When it comes to these people, I actually think that I disagree with Rand on this. If you know her stance on individuals in war, because I believe that these people are innocent. That people who are actively taking a stance against their government, who understand morally right and wrong, good and evil, I don't think that they can be held responsible for the actions of the other people in their countries. And while, yes, citizens are responsible for their governments, people also do have free will. And these people who are, again, actively fighting against their government, as much as they can try to sound the alarm to get people to wake up about the dangers of living under a government that doesn't respect rights, of living under a government that attacks other countries, they can't force people to change their minds. And I think that these types of people, not only are they innocent, I think that they're heroes for trying to make a change, for valuing their lives and valuing their country enough to want things to be different. Now, here's the unfortunate and horrible situation these people end up in. When it comes to war, they end up in having two options. One, is that they can stay in their country and fight back against their government, continue doing what they're doing, which can sometimes lead to them being in danger. Either because their government doesn't want them to speak out against them, doesn't want them to fight back, or because they can get caught in the crossfires of the war between their government and the defending government. They also have the option to leave, to try to escape, to go somewhere else where they can be under a government that is more rights-respecting. But this can also be dangerous. A lot of these dictatorships, they have very strict control over their borders. And trying to leave can mean risking their lives. Now, this is not a situation that I hope anyone ever ends up in, have to decide whether to stay and risk their life or leave and risk their life. I don't know what I would do in that situation. But unfortunately, this is the reality of the people who live under these evil regimes. While the country that is defending themselves should not target these people, they're innocent, they are not aiding to the war machine, there is not a military benefit to targeting them. Sometimes they do get caught in the crossfires. And in these situations, I will repeat myself, it is the fault and the responsibility of the aggressing government when these people end up getting hurt or killed. And that is because they would not be in danger if the aggressing government did not bring them into war, did not drag them into war by attacking the defending government. And oftentimes, people who are fighting against their own government, who are these rebels, they understand this. They don't want their government to continue on. They want to see the fall of their government. They understand the military action that has to be taken for them to fall. And so, because the alternative is that if the defending government stops fighting because they are innocent, that means the evil government is allowed to continue. The evil government is allowed to continue doing what they're doing. They're allowed to continue their evil. And people with the moral clarity to know that evil has to be destroyed, know that that is not an option. It is not an option to allow these governments to continue doing what they're doing. Now, when we're talking about innocence and innocence getting caught in the crossfire, we have to now talk about kids. And this is probably the hardest one to think about because kids are obviously innocent. They're obviously innocent. Kids they don't even understand what's happening. And when I say kids, I mean young kids. I'm not talking about like a 17-year-old who, enlists in the army and goes to fight for this evil regime. I'm talking about these young kids who don't understand what's happening around them. They have no ability to understand what's happening around them. And it is the adults who are making these decisions to raise them under these regimes, to go to war, and they have no way to politically affect change in their country. It is the parents' job, or the responsibility of parents, to protect their kids. It is the responsibility of parents to protect their rights and to raise them in an environment where they can flourish. So I believe that to raise a kid under an oppressive regime, especially one like Hamas, where they're going to be indoctrinated from a young age into these beliefs that are just so detrimental to them living a good life, I think that is evil. I can't imagine doing that to a child. And even more so, I look at these kids who are getting killed, and I think, where are their parents? And what I mean by that is, I don't have any kids yet, but if I was in danger, my mother would do everything in her power to get me out of that situation. If I was in the US and I was in danger, she would get a rowboat and get us to row away if we had to. She would get an army of mama bear parents to go to the White House and stop whatever is happening. There is no way that she would sit around and do nothing or to support anything that would put me in danger. She does not know what happened in London. I hope she never finds out, because she cares about me and my well-being so much that she would absolutely lose her mind if I was in imminent danger. But I see these parents who, they know what happened on October 7th, they know that there are hostages being held in Gaza, and yet not only are they not denouncing Hamas, not blaming them for what happened, they aren't doing anything. They are allowing Hamas to continue and putting their kids in danger in the process. And I think that it is actually insane to expect not only Israel to protect the rights of anyone who isn't an Israeli, to protect the rights of citizens of a country that's government doesn't protect their rights, but to care about these kids more than their parents do. I think their parents are at fault for putting them in danger. I think that their government is at fault for putting them in danger. And I think that Israel cannot stop because these children are being used as shields. Hamas is very well known for storing their bombs and their weapons near playgrounds, for building their tunnels under schools. And they're doing this because they want to use these kids as shields. And that is horrific. Horrific on the part of Hamas. Horrific for them to put these kids in danger. Horrific for their parents to not do anything about this. But Israel cannot stop in defeating the war machine, in defending their own lives, defending their citizens, because these people, Hamas and the parents, have decided that they do not care about their kids' lives. Speaking of human shields, we have to talk about hostages. A lot of hostages were taken on October 7th. And some of them are still in Gaza. Some of them have been returned to Israel, and some of them have ended up being killed. I think when we first start talking about hostages, we have to talk about why. Why do these governments take hostages? And it's to use them as shields. It's the same reason why Hamas puts tunnels under schools. It's the same reason why they put their bases in hospitals. It is because they are hoping that Israel will stop defending themselves, will stop trying to destroy Hamas if they think that they're going to hurt an innocent person, a hostage, a kid, someone who is in a hospital. But here's the reality of taking hostages, or of stopping your military action because of hostages. When you let hostages determine your entire military strategy, it encourages taking more hostages. Because now the people who took them and are using them as shields know that this works. They know that this is a way for them to continue fighting without pushback. And it sends a message, not only to Hamas, but to any of these other countries around Israel that are aggressive and that don't like them. Yeah, now you can take hostages. And if you take them, you won't get hurt because they'll use them as shields. Now, Israel should not target hostages, nor have they. These are citizens of Israel. They should not target them, and if possible, they should try to get them back. But if they have to choose between losing the war and the hostages getting hurt or caught in the crossfire, they have to choose winning the war. They have to choose to destroy Hamas. And if these hostages end up getting killed in their attempts to destroy Hamas, it is entirely on Hamas. It is entirely on Hamas for taking them hostage. It is entirely on Hamas for putting them in danger in the first place. These hostages would be safe if Hamas had not taken them into Gaza, if Hamas had not started the war. All of the deaths, children, innocents, hostages, they're all on Hamas for initiating force, for putting them in danger, for starting this conflict in the first place. Now, what about the defending government? Do they have any responsibility? As I've said, all of the deaths are the responsibility of the government that starts the war. Well, yes, their responsibility is to win. It is to defeat the enemy, to protect the rights of their citizens. But this is where I'm actually going to be critical of Israel and Ukraine and how they have responded. Because I don't think that they have responded to the best of their abilities in some ways. As I've said before, this is not the first time that Hamas in Gaza has attacked Israel. And Israel has not responded in the past with the force that was needed to destroy Hamas. Part of October 7th happening is because Hamas has been allowed to survive and fester in Gaza for over 25 years, 30 years. They were created in 1988, and in their founding documents, they state their goal is to destroy Israel. And yet they have been allowed to stay in Gaza with the knowledge of the Israeli government. Okay, the past is the past, what about now? They are responding with the force that I think is necessary. They are trying to destroy Hamas now. Except they keep pausing for these ceasefires. They keep allowing aid into Gaza. They are sending food and supplies and fuel into the official government of Gaza, which is Hamas, and they are using these supplies and this fuel and these ceasefires to prolong the war. They are making more weapons. They are using these pauses to re-strategize, to move people around, shuffle them around, and to come back with more force against Israel. These ceasefires that they keep allowing to take place are going to end up costing more lives than if they had dealt with Hamas correctly in the first place, dealt with them very quickly after October 7th. Israel also, while they have had a lot of airstrikes in Gaza, they are sending in a lot of ground troops. And this is because they don't want to kill Gazan civilians. But what we have to remember is that Israeli soldiers, are citizens of Israel too. And their lives are also the responsibility of the Israeli government. So when they are sending in troops because they are afraid of potentially killing Gazans in airstrikes, what they are saying is that the lives of the citizens of the enemy nation are more important than the lives of their citizens, are more important than the lives of their soldiers. And this is wrong. All of these things that they have done have violated their job in protecting the rights of their citizens. Ukraine has also struggled to respond appropriately. When Russia first attacked in 2022, many of the young men in Ukraine were not allowed to leave the country and were forced to enlist in a draft. Now, as I've said before, this decision to stay and fight or to leave and go somewhere else is a very hard decision to make, and it is not something that I hope anyone ever has to make that decision or is put in that situation, and these young men were put in a very hard situation. But that decision is something that only they can make, and only that they should make. Their government should not tell them, you have to stay and fight, if they don't want to. They should be able to choose whether they want to stay and defend their homes, or whether they want to take their families and leave and go somewhere else where they can be safe. And because of this, there are a lot of soldiers who have died in Ukraine who could have been off in other countries, safe with their families, if they decided to make that decision for themselves. Now, I'm criticizing these governments because I think that we should. I think that because they are the victims of the war, because they are innocent, it does not mean that every single decision that they make is good. But when it comes to the responsibility of the deaths, the causes of the war, this is still fully on the aggressors. It is still on Hamas, it is still on Putin, because again, without their aggression, these countries would not have been put in this situation in the first place. They would not have been forced to defend themselves. They would not have been forced to make these hard decisions. A lot of people have a really hard time thinking through these ideas. I had a hard time thinking through these ideas. This presentation was really hard for me to write and hard for me to think through. I see a lot of people on social media who are calling for ceasefires from Israel, who are calling for negotiation from Ukraine, who are saying, well, why don't you just sacrifice a little bit of your people so that the war isn't so bad, there's not so many deaths. The reality is, as I said at the beginning, war is hell. It is brutal. It is always hard. War is kill or be killed. And whether or not you win the war, whether or not you have total victory or not, you always lose. everyone loses something. Whether it is people who die, whether it is property that is destroyed, whether it is people who are separated from their families. And this is why no country and no citizen should ever want to start a war. People should do all that they can to avoid war, because it ends up being one of the most tragic things a person can ever go through. But when a war is started, when a country is aggressive, and if you are the country that is fighting in self-defense, you have to win. You have to do everything that you can to win, or else you are not valuing your life. You are not valuing the lives of your citizens. You are not valuing your existence. And there is no restriction. There are no restrictions, there are no permissions that are needed to value your life and to defend it. There is no international law, there is no UN permission, there is no court of war crimes that should stop you from acting in genuine self-defense of your life and of your well-being. Because your life is important. And I'm not just saying this in the context of war. Your lives are important. Your lives are precious. Your lives are valuable. And you should do everything that you can to preserve them. And if anyone tells you otherwise, tells you that you need permission or that there are restrictions for you to protect your life, for you to give yourself the opportunity to flourish, I want you to give them a message for me. I want you to tell them to shove it where the sun don't shine and go to hell. Thank you.